Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Love and Abuse. I want to let you know that all information on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being. And as always, pick your battles wisely. We want to be careful who we choose to spar with. And that just means protect yourself. If you know that someone is violent or hurtful or aggressive, you don't want to be around that type of energy. And I don't think I really need to say this. I think that's pretty common sense. But I just wanted to let you know that some of the things I talk about on the show will ask you to be sometimes a little bit confrontational. It's going to feel confrontational. Those confrontations might just be you putting up a boundary. When you put up a boundary and say, you know what, I don't want to take this anymore. I don't want that type of behavior anymore. So I'm asking you to stop. I think most, quote, normal people will not be aggressive. They won't be violent. They won't be hurtful, well, at least physically. But I have to let you know about this disclaimer that some people might get a little bit aggressive. So that's why I say that. And I won't explain this every time. I just want to let you know that that's something you have to keep in mind, that sometimes we don't know someone else's extent, their capabilities. And hopefully you know someone well enough where you don't see that happening. And that is helpful to know what their capability is, what their extent is. And another reason I say that is sometimes the end is near. And what I mean by that is sometimes you are going to break up or break it off or disconnect from someone in your life. And when the end is near, people tend to act a little differently than they've always acted. Some things come out of them that you may not expect. My friend Dean told me once that during a divorce, your soon-to-be ex will act very uncharacteristic of themselves. They will act uncharacteristically different. And what that means is you'll see behavior that you haven't seen before. You won't even recognize their behavior because it's just so different than who they were this whole time. And that can happen when somebody is about to lose something and they know there's no way back, or they believe there's no way back or out of it. So let's just say that you're going to disconnect or break up with someone, and they know that there's no way to fix it or convince you, or they guilt you into not leaving, and you decide not to fall for it, or you decide that you're not going to stick around anymore because you've had enough, then you might see behavior in them that is uncharacteristic. And you might ask yourself, where did this person come from? It's very similar to when you started a relationship with someone, especially a romantic relationship, and if they have emotionally abusive behavior in them, it doesn't come out for the first 1, 2, 3, several months sometimes, and then suddenly it comes out and you're thinking, who is this person? This isn't the person I met. This isn't the person I love. Who is this person right now? What is this behavior? And because you never saw it before, you think, what did I do wrong? That's what you ask yourself. What did I do wrong? What did I do that caused this? And this is where the self-blame can start. I don't want you to get into a cycle of self-blame. That's very hard. I mean, that advice is very hard to follow. I know, because you can be going along just fine in any relationship, and then suddenly you start getting these vibes from them, and you start seeing this behavior from them, and you start getting these looks from them, and you start hearing these words, and it gets more and more severe over time. And you might think, wow, everything was going fine, so it must have been something I did. No, that's not often the case. If you're listening to this show, it's not often the case. What's often the case is that something was not revealed or divulged in the beginning because there was an agenda. Now, I have to be really careful here because sometimes they don't know there's an agenda. Sometimes the emotionally abusive person doesn't know they have an agenda. I speak from experience. When I was in my 20s and 30s, my experience was I got into a relationship and I treated my partner like they were a queen. I gave them love, I gave them gifts, I showered them with compliments. Everything about them was great. They could do no wrong because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. You're supposed to woo or wow your partners in life. So I did that. But after the honeymoon period, after I realized, hey, this person's going to stick around, they're in love with me, they want to be with me, I started to feel more secure that I wasn't going to lose the relationship, but I started to feel insecure that if they developed too much independent thought, that it would risk the relationship. So I became insecure in their behavior. So when they started maybe not wanting to be with me all the time, then I felt a little insecure about that, and I would have something to say about it. And, I'm not proud of what I'm talking about here. I'm just giving you the behaviors that I did when I was younger. But that's what I did. And when I would say something about it, like, hey, can I hang out with you when you go out with your friends? And they would be uncomfortable about that because they just wanted to hang out with their friends one night. Then I would start to feel like, oh, maybe she doesn't want to be with me anymore. That's the extreme thought, but that was what went through my head. Maybe she doesn't want to be with me anymore. Maybe because she doesn't want to hang out with me as much as I want to hang out with her, that the relationship's in jeopardy. So what do I need to do? I need to either stop that behavior, or I need to do something else, maybe make her feel bad about going out, or maybe even worse, make her feel bad about leaving me behind, abandoning me. And I did stuff like that. And it worked because my partners in life did feel bad. And so they would start to include me in things. But of course, by me doing that behavior, it started to create that wedge in the relationship. It started to cause them to distance themselves emotionally. And so over time, this rift between us grew wider and wider until they didn't want anything to do with me anymore. I was just clingy and possessive. I had issues. I had dysfunctions. So my relationships ended. And this is what can happen, is if the hurtful person doesn't realize what they're doing, the other person will start to drift away emotionally. And when that happens, unless the hurtful person changes their ways, the relationship doesn't have a chance. The hurtful person has to change their ways, because the person that's being victimized, in cases like I talk about in the show, wasn't exposed to that behavior from the beginning, and now that they're exposed to it, they reach this conflict inside themselves, and they feel guilty, and they feel shame, and they feel confused, and they don't know what to do. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like you have the first few months where that person doesn't show up that way, and then suddenly they're showing up that way, and you don't know where that comes from. Who is this person? And this brings it right back to what I was talking about with agendas. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't have an agenda. I didn't consciously know that what I was doing was hurtful or even wrong. That's tough because there are people that are in my position right now that are doing behavior they don't know is wrong. They just believe they need to do it in order to stay secure in their life or keep the relationship in their life. And they're going about it the wrong way. And I bring out a show like this and my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, in order to help empower people understand what their own behavior does to their relationships and does to their life. And, if they don't get it after I talk about it on both shows, I'm not sure what else to do, except some people just need to realize what they're doing. Some people need to have an epiphany of some sort, like I did eventually, and that was when my marriage ended, when I finally decided to take a look at my own life and realize that maybe I was the common denominator of all my relationship problems. Maybe it was me. Maybe there's something that I'm doing. I couldn't believe it. It didn't make any sense that it could be me. But I decided to finally take a look at myself. And when I did, I realized a lot. I realized, I started asking myself questions like, why do I care if my girlfriend or my wife goes out with her friends? Why does it bother me? Why do I have fear around that? What is causing this fear? Where did this fear come from? Why am I so insecure? And then I started asking myself harder questions. Let's just say that she goes out and she finds someone else. Why does that bother me so much? That's a harder question because I didn't really want that to happen. I just wanted to know why. I think wanting to know why you feel the way you feel about things and where those feelings come from, especially where they originated, can be very helpful and can be very empowering and can help change your life on both sides of any emotionally abusive relationship. If you're the victim of emotional abuse and you're the type of person that continues to receive hurtful behavior and there's something inside you that says, I got to stay. I got to stay no matter what because I owe him or her this, or I feel bad for him or her, or I was always told you need to keep your commitments. Whatever it is, where did that come from? Is it still valid? Is it something that you can question or change? Is there something that you need to heal in you to change things for you? And that doesn't mean you should automatically just get up and leave. It just means you start questioning yourself so that you can build resources inside of you, so that you can have better understanding of why you do the things you do and why you feel the way you feel. And maybe why you take bad behavior in the first place. Why am I accepting of this bad behavior? Why do I tolerate it? Be a great question if you're dealing with that. And, of course, the other side, the hurtful person, the abusive person. Why am I doing this? Why am I making him or her feel guilty? Why do I want them to feel bad about themselves? Why would I do that? Why am I doing that? What's important about that? Why do I feel the need to hurt that person? And where does that come from? And I'm sure there's fear inside there. What am I really afraid of? Because what I'm really afraid of has nothing to do with them. It really doesn't. Anything that you're afraid of usually has nothing to do with anyone in your life today, unless they're an immediate threat or harm. I get that. But typically it's something from the past. It's something that we carried in from childhood that we still hold on to today. Just like for the longest time, I never wanted my partner to drink alcohol. For the first 10 years of my adult relationships, I didn't like when they drank alcohol. And then one day I asked myself, why do I have a problem with my partner drinking alcohol? And the immediate obvious answer came up, well, my stepfather drank alcohol since I was 1. I was in that upbringing, in that dangerous environment where he would drink and become abusive and become scary and throw things and break things. It was awful. I didn't know any other childhood, so I thought it was normal, but it was still awful. And so when I got out of that upbringing and into the adult world, I held on to those childhood fears, and I also developed controlling behaviors so that I could control my environment because I thought, hey, now that I'm an adult, I can control what happens around me. As a kid, I couldn't, but as an adult, I can. So I shifted the roles, and I became a controlling, hurtful person. I wasn't only a controlling, hurtful person, but I had controlling, hurtful behaviors because I had so much PTSD from childhood, and I didn't want that to happen in my life. So I had an unconscious agenda. That's what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes people don't know they have an agenda. I didn't know I had an agenda. So I walked into relationships with this unconscious agenda that was activated as soon as I realized the relationship was good and secure and I felt safe, like she wasn't going to leave and she was in love with me and everything was good. And suddenly my behaviors would kick in. out of fear of what happened in childhood happening again. I can look at that in hindsight, just like any one of us can look at what we do today in hindsight and tell ourselves, oh, I behaved this way because of that. So how can I change that? I mean, if it's not working for you, how can you change that? And that's just something good to think about and good to reflect on and just have some thoughts about. Ask yourself questions like I was asking earlier. This kind of stems from something I talk about in the Mean Workbook, which is the unconscious manipulator versus the conscious manipulator. I believe there are two distinct types of people that control and manipulate. One is very conscious of what they're doing. They know they're doing it, and they don't care if you're hurt or not. And then the other one, which I feel that I didn't know that I was doing it. I cared if the other person was hurt, but it wasn't enough to change what I was doing because I didn't believe what I was doing was wrong. I believed I was right. And that really put me in a bad position because that meant I never wanted to look at what I was doing as anything else but right. That's tough because when you're around somebody like that, it's hard to be around someone like that. It's hard to be around someone who does not reflect. And so I hope that whoever you're around has the ability to reflect, or maybe they're listening to this right now and they think, well, maybe there are things that I do that I should take a look at. And those questions will come up like, why do I do that? What am I afraid of? What would happen if I didn't do that? And then their big fears will come up and they'll think, oh, so if I don't do that and he or she does what I don't want them to do, then I feel alone, I feel abandoned, and maybe I have an abandonment issue or a rejection issue. I need to deal with that. That's all internal. It's all about them. It's all about that one person, not about their partner, not about their loved ones, not about the other person at all. And so it can happen. People can have these realizations. They just often need to get there themselves. I mean, it's very, very hard to convince somebody else that's being hurtful that they're wrong, especially to convince somebody who's unconscious of their behavior that they're wrong. It's very hard to do that. In fact, the most powerful and effective way to do that, a lot of victims of abuse don't want to do. This is a powerful takeaway. If you're going to take anything away from this episode, the most effective means of helping someone realize their behavior is bad and to make them conscious of it is to remove yourself from the equation. That could mean a separation. That could mean disconnecting for a while. It could just mean a vacation away from each other. I don't know what it means for you. And I'm not saying that you have to do this because some people aren't in this position to do it. But I'm just giving you my experience. The most effective means I've seen of helping someone become conscious of their bad behavior is to remove yourself from the equation. And what that does is it makes them finally reflect on themselves because you're not in the picture. If you're not in the picture, they have the opportunity to reflect on themselves. They may or may not take that opportunity, but from what I've seen in my experience with people that I've worked with and people that have written to me, when they've left the situation or disconnected or separated or whatever it is, the other person has an opportunity to reflect on themselves and their own behavior. And hopefully, just like the realizations that I had, hopefully they have realizations that they are the common denominator for all the relationship challenges that they're having. Now, the problem is if they haven't been in too many relationships, or maybe you're the first or second, that's a challenge because they don't have enough to go on. They don't have enough experience in their life from which to draw. And because of that, they may not comprehend that their own behavior is causing this. They may still think it's outside themselves. Most of our problems are inside of ourselves. We just need to figure it out. We just need to reflect on it. We need to ask ourselves questions so that we don't get stuck in situations that we feel locked into and we feel like we can't get out of because we're so committed to it for one reason or another. But in reality, if we reflected on what's going on inside our own heads, then we'll start to understand our own behaviors and why we make the decisions that we make. And the disconnect that I'm talking about, when you remove yourself from the equation, from the relationship, you get to reflect on yourself too, without the other person involved. So if there's a victim of emotional abuse and a perpetrator of emotional abuse, the perpetrator no longer has that person around. So that gives them a chance to reflect on what they've been doing all this time. And the victim no longer has the perpetrator around, so they get to reflect on some of the responses that they've had to the perpetrator's behavior and some of the reasons they might continue to tolerate that bad behavior, and asking themselves questions and reflecting. This is why it's often the most effective step you can take when it comes to changing the dynamic of an emotionally abusive relationship. I'm not saying that you have to do this. I'm not saying this is the way out, because I've seen couples work through this, but it often reaches a breaking point or an intoleration point. And I'm going to talk about that too. In fact, let me read you an email that came in that I really want to address today. I just kind of wanted to get that first part out of the way because it was on my mind and I think it might be helpful to you. So I hope it was. But I'm going to read you this email. I'm going to talk about a couple of the things that came up. This person wants to be known as Rochelle. So Rochelle, if you're listening, thank you for writing. And I'm going to read this and keep out some of the details to protect your privacy. But she says, "Dear Paul, I'm writing to you after spending some time in a women's refuge with my small children. I was so scared to leave my husband of many years because we had children together and I have multiple health concerns. But honestly, your Love and Abuse podcast has revolutionized my life. I was suffering from the most insidious psychological and emotional abuse for years, which only came fully to light under the magnifying glass of coronavirus and lockdown. Each week I listened to an episode, and it was as though you were personally speaking to me about my husband and my inner turmoil. You gave me the tools to protect myself from further abuse while in the situation and empowered me to leave with my children and all my health issues. As a licensed mental health professional myself, I have experienced a lot of shame that this has happened and still struggle to let people know. It's also been difficult navigating what to say to the children, as, by and large, they have a good dad and love him dearly. Further pointers on how not to feel shame and guilt regarding how much the children's lives got turned upside down and what to say to the children would be most welcome. Thanks again." Okay, so thank you so much, Rochelle. This is such a powerful message. You took major, scary steps. There was very scary steps. And I am very proud of you. I hope you take that as I mean that. I really mean that. I really think it takes a lot of guts to do what you did. And one of the reasons I read your email is because I need other people to hear this. I need other people to know that when they are in a dire situation, your circumstances were dire, they were scary, and you needed to take a big step, and you did, with children and health issues. And it sounds like you didn't have anywhere else to go. You ended up in a women's refuge. So that is a massive step. And because you're writing to me, it sounds like you made it through it. And I realize that you still have to deal with this person and you still have issues to deal with, and you've got the shame and guilt you're dealing with. But the big hurdle was leapt. You leapt over this hurdle. You took the step and you found a way to remove yourself from the equation. You found a way. And your husband has the opportunity to reflect and realize, oh my God, my behavior is so bad. I should stop that. I should get help. It may not be that way. It may not happen for you. And maybe it's too late for you to reconcile. Maybe you've had enough, and that's fine. Absolutely. But you both have an opportunity now to reflect on the decisions that you made and reflect on who you are as an individual without this person in your life. You both have that opportunity. But let me focus on you and your questions and what you shared here. The first thing that you shared was realizing how bad it was when you were in lockdown. I think a lot of people will realize there is bad behavior in the relationship, but they develop a toleration of it, a resilience of it for so long that it doesn't get worse until you are exposed to more of it. So the lockdown exposes us to it more. But I would ask anyone in any relationship, if you are less than 50% happy most of the time, then something needs to change or give, or something needs to heal. Something needs to happen. If you're less than 50% happy, if you're more than 50% happy all the time, most of the time, then you're probably in one of those relationships that are, either up and down and it's normal, but most of the time you're happy and it's okay. And if you're good with that, I'm good with that. But if it's less than 50%, then you're not happy. You're not in a good situation. You need to consider things. You need to think about things. You need to reflect. And so I'm going to assume that she was definitely less than 50% happy. In fact, I would say that she was probably 95% unhappy most of the time. And I might be a little generous with that. But maybe there were good times. Maybe there weren't. Maybe there was never a good time. I don't know. But she obviously realized that she'd had enough and she needed to do something about it. And so I wanted to read this for others that might be in a scary situation and they're not sure if they can take a big step like this. If you're thinking about taking that big step, you can. If you have the ability to think about it, you can do it. Sounds a little new agey. I don't mean to sound new agey, but I want to let you know that the scariest steps in life often require taking. Now, what does that mean? That's just to motivate you. That's just to motivate you that your scary steps seem scary because you haven't done it. But once you do it, it still may be scary, but once it's done, you look back and then you won't be so scared anymore. You might have some consequences from it, and that's the scary part. But once you've leapt the first big hurdle, then typically you can deal with the consequences as they come. Now, I say this knowing that everyone's situation is different, and some people don't have the resources, some people don't have the support structure in place, and some people, like this person, Rochelle, she had to find a refuge, and she was lucky to find one, I'm sure. And maybe there's one near you, maybe there's not. Maybe it's only for women, and there are men listening to this too. There are challenges, there are limitations, but there's always a way. And sometimes you just have to reach in and find that way and reach deeper, do your research, and build a support structure. You might have to do some research and find people that can support you. We all have access to the internet nowadays, and if you don't, go to the library, get access, find a way to do it, borrow a friend's phone, and just get online and look for resources that you might need, even if it's joining another group of people that are in your same situation. There are groups online that you can find. There are people online that you can find that can be helpful. If you're in a situation that you want to build your support structure, then you can find others that are like you or are in your similar situation, and at least you'd have some peer support, and that can be helpful. But I'm reading you Rochelle's email to let you know that it was hard for her and she did it. Now, she's still in the middle of it. There are still things that she's going through. She's now dealing with some emotional aftermath here, and she probably still has to deal with her children's father, and now what does she do? Now she has these emotions. I think it's important to get through and past the emotions that come up. But let me reread what she said. She said she's a mental health professional, and she's experienced a lot of shame that it happened, and she's still struggling to let people know. So this really stuck out to me because every type of person listens to this show, and it doesn't matter how much you've learned in school. It doesn't matter what you do for a profession. It doesn't matter. You could be doing exactly what I'm doing now. I'm teaching others about emotional abuse and how to heal from emotionally abusive situations and avoid hurtful people or work through challenges in your relationship. You could be in any position in any area of life and experience this. We all do. I've heard from many mental health professionals that are going through emotionally abusive relationships. So you're not alone, and I don't want you to feel alone. In fact, a lot of mental health professionals have had experiences in their life that prompted them to become a mental health professional. And I call those people superheroes. I love that people who have gone through suffering have decided to turn it around and help others. I love that. I think you are the superheroes. If you've gone through any type of suffering, no matter what you do for a profession, and you've decided to turn that into helping others, you're a superhero. And let me add to that. You mentioned that you still feel a lot of shame that happened and you struggle to let people know. Your story is the inspiration that people need to hear. Because when you become empowered and take the steps that you need to take for you and those you love, that is the inspiration that others need. And I have much more respect for someone who's gone through the challenges that I've gone through than somebody who hasn't had any of the challenge that I've had and wants to guide me. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have respect for those who haven't had my challenges, but if somebody came along and said, when I was young, I was also in an alcoholic home, and my mom was also a people pleaser, and I was afraid all the time. I used to wait in my room until it was all over and just pray. And if somebody came up to me and told me that, I'd be like, you're the one I want to work with. You know what I'm struggling with. You are going to be my hero because you went through what I went through and you got through it. So when I hear from anyone that says, I went through this experience and it was 10, 20, 30 years and I finally got out of it, that's the person I want to hear from. That's the person with the most experience. That's the person that's going to guide me to a better place. So Rochelle, you as a mental health professional are now a superhero because you have been through it. And the shame that you're feeling, what is that attached to? Is that attached to the idea that maybe you should have made a decision to leave sooner? You did mention your kids. You felt like maybe you're putting your kids through this. You said there's shame and guilt because of that. But I want to make sure that you understand what shame really is. Shame requires intention. Shame means I meant to expose my kids to hurtful behavior. That, to me, is shame. Shame means I purposefully and willfully chose to be exposed to this hurtful behavior and allow my kids to be exposed to it too. Because if that is true for you, then maybe you need to feel some shame. I don't think it's true, but I think inside, if you wanted yourself and your children to be exposed to hurtful behavior, then maybe some shame needs to be in there to help you process things. But if it wasn't willful, if it wasn't intentional, if you didn't want that, then I'm taking shame out of your psyche. I'm taking it out of your reality because shame doesn't apply. I know you might feel it. There are things about it that you need to process, but I want you to relate intention to shame because you need intention to feel shame. So if you're feeling shame, I know it's easy for me to say don't feel it, but it doesn't apply. And I know that's easy for me to say as well because you still may feel it. And this is why I'm going to tell you to ask yourself, what exactly do I feel shameful about? Because if you say, well, I should have done this sooner, I should have took my kids out of this situation sooner, then I'm going to come back and say there is no possible way you could have done this any sooner. You didn't know how. You didn't know how. You couldn't have done it. You didn't have the tools. You didn't have the mental capacity to do it. Because if you did, you would have done it. If you had the tools and the mental capacity and the support structure and everything lined up, you would have done it. If you had no fear, if you had the strength and the agility and the finances or whatever else you were missing, you would have done it. You would have. I know you would have because you just did it, which means things had to line up. Things had to be in place for that to happen. Even if it was all the mental game. Even inside your own mind, it has to line up. So this would have happened earlier if all that lined up. So there's no possible way you could have done what you did. There's no way. So I want you to be okay that things finally lined up inside you and maybe outside of you. Everything lined up and you were able to take that step. But that step wasn't available before because not all of this was lined up. And I'm going to say it again. If it was lined up, you would have done it. But there were things that weren't lined up yet. So that's not on you. That's just the way things are. My girlfriend has a garden outside our house, and she grew cucumbers and squash and tomatoes and all kinds of things. And I love the cucumbers, so she made me all these cucumbers. But there's no way I could have gone out there on day 3 of her planting seeds and picked a cucumber. Why is that? Because it wasn't all lined up yet. The seed had to sprout, it had to grow up from the ground and create a little tiny plant, which grew into a bigger plant, which started to blossom, which started to create the initial stages of the cucumber. And all of those things took time. They have stages. This is how life works. Things come in phases and stages, and things need to be perfect and lined up. The plant needed sun, the plant needed water, the plant needed fertile soil, the plant needed a lot. Just like you need all the resources in place. And sometimes that takes time. So forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for anything that you blame yourself for, because there's no way that things were lined up before. If they were, you would have picked the cucumbers. If you could have done it on day 3, I'm sure you would have. But they weren't lined up. You weren't physically prepared, mentally prepared, spiritually prepared, financially prepared. Whatever you needed to be prepared for, you weren't. Therefore, I want you to forgive yourself. There's nothing to forgive yourself for, but if you are blaming yourself for not doing things sooner, or how about we go back further in time, for picking the wrong guy? Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we pick the wrong person and we go, oh crap, I just picked the wrong person and now I'm stuck. You got to forgive yourself. You got to move on, because that self-forgiveness is one of the things that has to line up for you. That is one of the ducks that has to be in a row in order for you to take some big steps. And if any one of these things are out of whack or are not in alignment, it might take a little longer. Or you might have to take a big risk. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we take steps when everything's not in alignment. I don't have a problem with that either. But that takes a whole different set of skills. If you can do that, then you're a different type of person. And maybe you aren't built like that. I mean, it's very scary to take a risk, especially with children. I mean, children by itself, when you have kids, you want to do everything the right way so the kids don't get hurt. And what you did was take your kids into protection. I want you to hear that clearly. What you did was take your kids into protection. And it sounds like you're not trying to keep those kids from their dad. In fact, it sounds like you're taking them out of a toxic situation into a safe place. So not only will they have a safe place, but they will also have a relationship with their father. How much better could you have done for your kids? There's nothing I can think of that might be better than that. I mean, whatever regrets you have don't matter. Right now, you're taking steps that you need to take today. What you've taught your kids is it's not a good idea to stay in a toxic situation, and it's better to take steps to protect yourself so that you can create a life that's more copacetic and loving and supportive for everyone. Believe it or not, you have given your husband a great gift. You have given everyone a great gift. You have given him the opportunity to choose to heal or not. He may not take that, but you have given him that opportunity. You've given your kids an opportunity to experience both of their parents in a healthier place. What is my dad like when he's healthy? What is my dad like when there's no toxicity around? That might be a good situation for them. What's my mom like when she's not in that toxic situation? Oh, she seems happier. Now you have a formula that works in this family, in this dynamic, and it could be the very thing that keeps everyone the happiest and the healthiest. I know there's still challenges ahead, but you have taken steps to irradiate the toxicity, the radioactive elements of the family unit that you were in. There were radioactive elements in there. I mean, it doesn't even matter what the origin of the hurtful behavior was anymore. You just had to protect everyone from the toxicity, and the steps you took did just that. Now, what you might say to me is that, oh, he's going to be upset and he's going to be angry and he's going to say that I ruined the family. That's his thing. He's going to say a lot of things to try to make you feel bad or guilty because that's his role right now. So we need to let him play his role out. Not that it's fun, not that it's pleasant for you at all, but don't take that personally because he's still coming from a place of fear. And when somebody comes from a place of fear, especially a hurtful person, they're going to do and say things that hurt. That is the role he's playing. And he may or may not ever take the opportunity to look at himself and want to heal from that and want to address his fears, maybe his childhood, maybe his upbringing. That's his choice, but at least he has that choice. And while you're in the relationship, they often don't look inward. They often don't reflect. And that keeps the toxicity alive because as long as you're around, there's no accountability. They feel like they can maybe do anything they want or control you. And because you're not leaving, they just keep doing the same behavior. But when you take yourself out of that, they can't do that behavior anymore. And since you're not around, they have to do some self-reflecting and figure out what's going on inside of them. Again, if they choose. So that's his battle, and he might say some hurtful things, but don't take it personally. Again, easy for me to say, hard to hear, but I want to let you know that the behavior that you may get from him isn't personal. It's just fear. He has a lot of fear, so he needs to deal with that. And he will deal with that. He'll figure it out. He may not get better. He may. I don't know. But he's an adult. He can work through this. He's not a kid. You don't have to take care of him anymore. He can take care of himself. He'll figure it out. Because where your focus needs to be is where it's already been, on making sure that you and your family are safe, which it sounds like they are. So I understand that you may have some shame in there and you may have some guilt in there, but they may be originating from things that you really shouldn't feel shame or guilt for. Because everything that you've told me seems like the healthiest way to raise children. You might think, what? I'm in an abusive household and my kids were exposed to this toxic element and they might have problems when they grow older. Yeah, they might have problems when they grow older. I'm not going to lie. They might have problems. I had issues when I grew older. I mean, you heard my issues at the beginning of this episode, and every episode I talk about something that happened in my life or something that I did. Maybe the therapy that I had to go through, the depression that I went through. There are things that I went through, but as long as you keep showing up for your kids and saying, I know you had a challenge. We all had a challenge. I didn't have the tools and the resources that I need to leave earlier. I'm sorry if you experienced any hardship in growing up. And if you have anything to talk to me about, I'm here for you. As long as you're always there for your kids, then they're going to know that they can talk to you about anything. And that I found is the most powerful and effective form of parenting. I mean, you should hear my girlfriend talk to her son. He tells her almost everything. Things that are sometimes uncomfortable to hear. And he's like 19 years old, and he's telling her things that I would never have told my mom. It's like I didn't want to share all the stuff that I was doing, but he has no problem telling her all the stuff that he does because she doesn't judge him for the things he's doing. She doesn't put him down. She doesn't say, hey, you're wrong. You're a bad person for doing that. She just stays open. She is there for him. She knows that he has a hard time dealing with his dad, so she stays open to everything that he tells her. She may not like some of the stuff that he does, but at the same time, she doesn't judge him for it, and she might give him a little nudge in a different direction, but they have a fantastic relationship because she's always been there for him. She always listens, and I think that's one of the most important things you can do for your kids is listen, and ask questions. How do you feel about that? I mean, you're a mental health professional. You know what to ask. So that will be very helpful in their upbringing. But everything that you've written in this letter tells me that you've raised your kids in the right way. Yeah, you ended up in an emotionally abusive relationship, but when things lined up, you still did the right thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with everything that you told me. Everything you did was exactly the things that needed to happen in order for you to get to this point. If you wrote to me and said, my husband beats my kids daily and I'm not going to leave because I like where we live, I might have something else to say. I still wouldn't say that you were wrong. I would just probably nudge you a different direction because I wouldn't want that to happen to the kids. So everything that you're doing is, in my opinion, the right thing. I think you're a wonderful mom. It sounds like you're doing exactly what the kids need. So believe me, if anything, you have shown your kids what needs to be done when challenges come their way. So I hope that's helpful to you to hear this from someone who's dealt with a lot of emotionally abusive situations, not necessarily in my own life, but that too, but also in the lives of many of the people that I've worked with. You have done all the right things. And let me just say this as a final thing. If you have any fear about sharing your struggles or your stories with other people, with your friends, and I don't know if you're allowed to do that with your clients or not, but I do. I share my history with my clients all the time. But if you have any challenge sharing your struggle and, all these years that you had to endure abusive relationship, and you think people are going to say, well, why didn't you leave earlier? All you have to tell them is, things weren't lined up for me to leave earlier. I just couldn't do it. So I had to wait for things to line up. I had to wait for my emotional state to be in the right place. I had to wait for other things outside myself to line up, and everything in good timing. Yes, I wanted to leave earlier. Yes, I should have left earlier, but I just couldn't. I wasn't mentally prepared. And then when I became mentally prepared, I took the steps I needed to take. And sometimes things like that take time. And when you start sharing your challenges in life and the decisions that you could have or should have made at the time, but things just weren't lined up, when you start sharing all of this, you are being vulnerable. And that vulnerability allows others to be vulnerable with you. Because this is what happened with me when I started my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, back in 2013. About a year into it, or maybe less, I started choosing to be more vulnerable. I started telling my stories of times where I was embarrassed or I felt guilty or I felt shame. I started sharing that stuff, and that started pouring in the letters. I started getting so many people that also felt guilt or shame or fear or embarrassment, all of these things that they felt, that they were afraid to tell other people. And suddenly somebody came on the air and just started speaking about it, and that opened the door for them to share with me. What that has done is it has freed me from the fear of my own truths, my own history. It has freed me there, and it has allowed others to open up about their fears, their shames, their guilts. And here you are writing to me saying you feel shame and guilt. It opened you up. So imagine if I never shared my history and I came off as impeccable and told you that I never went through any of these challenges. It might be different, or maybe not. Maybe you would still feel like you could share this with me because I have a show like this. But I really do feel like the more transparent I am with people, the more transparent they are with me. And that's not the reason I do it. That's just what happens when I do it. That's the result I get. And it creates a connection. It creates trust. It creates relief for those who have been holding on to things for so long. Because sometimes people hold on to things forever, and then they die with this regret or this guilt. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen to you. So I just own my stuff. I just own my history. I own all my mistakes, all my bad choices. And I tell people, yep, that's what I did. I should have done differently. I had an 8-year relationship. The first 4 we were together, and then the second 4 we were married. So I was in this relationship for 8 years, and I treated my wife badly. I treated her well, and then I also treated her badly. And the bad part caused her to be more unhappy than she was happy. And because of that, she left. And I share this knowing that some people won't be comfortable with that. Like, this guy made a lot of mistakes, and why didn't he change back then? He should have changed earlier. You're right. I should have, but I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the knowledge. I wasn't emotionally prepared. I wasn't ready. Not everything was lined up for me to do that. And the day after she left and I started reflecting on my own life and the choices I've made in life was finally the day that everything started to line up. And we all need to have that day. We all need to have a moment of clarity when things start to line up, so we can make better decisions for ourselves. Thank you so much, Rochelle. I hope this episode has helped in some way. But I hope you are well, and I know that you already have the mental strength to take the right steps, and you're going to continue taking the right steps because it sounds like what you want is the best for you and your family. And to me, you're doing the best you can with the resources that you have, and it will get better. Thank you again, and thanks for tuning into another episode of Love and Abuse. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook provides an evaluation of your relationship based on a 200-point assessment. It's geared toward romantic relationships, but many have used it to determine if family or others in their life are being manipulative or emotionally abusive as well. If you're in a difficult relationship and would like to pinpoint the unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad, let the workbook help you discover the specific components of bad behavior and put into words what you're experiencing. Get the tools you need to help you reach clarity. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant because you are. Thank you again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.